Imagine a country that is, in reality, a continent of nations. Brazil, the South American giant, hides an astonishing truth. It is not just a state, but the home of more than 300 distinct indigenous peoples, each with its own language, cosmology, and way of understanding the world. While most history books focus on Portuguese colonization, the true cultural richness of Brazil lies in these communities that have resisted centuries of invasion, disease, and neglect. This is not only a story of survival, it is a vibrant testimony to human diversity at its fullest expression. If you are passionate about lost cultures and stories of resistance, give this video a like and subscribe to explore the deepest corners of human history. Brazil harbors the largest concentration of biological and cultural diversity on the planet, much of it protected by these original peoples. From the vast Amazonian territories to the fragmented coastal forests, indigenous presence is a fundamental, though often ignored, pillar of Brazilian identity. Today, we will journey into the heart of this diversity to understand who they are, how they live, and why their struggle is crucial for everyone's future. When we think of Brazil, carnival, soccer, and the beaches of Rio de Janeiro usually come to mind. However, beneath that vibrant surface lies a much more complex and ancient reality. At the time of European contact in 1500, it is estimated that there were between 2 and 6 million indigenous peoples, belonging to nearly 1,000 different groups. Today, although their population has been drastically reduced and many groups disappeared due to violence and disease, the survivors have regrouped, fiercely maintaining their cultural identity. The most recent official census identifies around 900,000 indigenous peoples, spread across more than 300 peoples, who speak over 270 different languages. This linguistic diversity is one of Brazil's greatest marvels. We are not talking about dialects. We are talking about language families as different from one another as Spanish is from Chinese. The main families are Tupi-Guarani, Macro-J, and Arawak, but there are dozens of other isolated and unique languages. For example, the Yanomami, who live along the border with Venezuela, have a worldview centered on the spirits of the forest and the shaman as a vital intermediary. Their rituals, their communal architecture known as the Shibono, and their deep knowledge of Amazonian pharmacopoeia make them a living anthropological treasure. In contrast, the Guarani, dispersed throughout southern and southeastern Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, have a much longer and more violent history of contact. Their ancestral search for the land without evil, a terrestrial paradise, has shaped their migrations and cultural resistance in the face of pressure from agricultural expansion. The history of contact with the Portuguese, and later with the Brazilian nation, has largely been a chronicle of dispossession and genocide. The Brazilwood cycle, sugarcane, the gold rush, and more recently, the expansion of cattle ranching and soy production have pushed these peoples to the limits of existence. European diseases such as smallpox and measles, for which they had no immunity, decimated entire populations at catastrophic rates. Colonization was not only a territorial occupation, it was an involuntary biological war and a deliberate cultural one. One of the most painful narratives is that of isolated peoples, or those in initial contact. It is estimated that there are more than 100 groups living without sustained contact with national society. These groups are the most vulnerable, as any encounter can introduce lethal diseases. Brazilian policy, through the National Indian Foundation, FUNAI, faces the difficult task of protecting these territories and preventing contact, a task that becomes nearly impossible with the relentless advance of illegal loggers, gold miners, garimpeiros, and drug traffickers. The very existence of these peoples is a declaration of sovereignty over the forest, and a reminder that there are other ways of life beyond the Western model. The struggle for land is the central axis of indigenous resistance. For these peoples, land is not a commodity. It is the foundation of their cultural identity, their pharmacy, their supermarket, and their temple. The demarcation of indigenous lands, or TIs, is a fundamental legal and political process in Brazil. When land is recognized as indigenous, it becomes federal territory for the exclusive use of that people, guaranteeing their physical and cultural survival. However, this process is constantly obstructed by powerful economic interests seeking to exploit vast natural resources, such as timber, minerals, and fertile soil, that are often located in or near these reserves. The case of the Kayapo, for example, is a paradigm of organized resistance.
They live in the Xingu River Basin and are known for their complex social structure, their elaborate coming-of-age ceremonies, and their impressive feather adornments. Led by charismatic figures such as Chief Raioni Metuktire, the Kayapo have strategically used the media and international alliances to defend their territory against dam construction and mining. They have shown that resistance is not only waged with arrows, but also with cameras and microphones, bringing their cause directly to global awareness. Another critical example is the situation of the Guarani Kaiowá in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. Their struggle is for the recovery of small parcels of ancestral land that were taken over by large soy and sugarcane plantations. They live in conditions of extreme poverty, crowded into tiny reserves or in improvised camps along highways, suffering from high rates of violence and youth suicide. Their story is a painful reflection of how territorial loss directly leads to social disintegration and human suffering. Indigenous worldviews offer an essential counterpoint to the Western vision. While the dominant culture sees nature as a resource to be exploited, indigenous peoples see it as a relative, a living being with whom they must maintain a relationship of mutual respect. Traditional indigenous medicine, based on thousands of years of experimentation and knowledge of biodiversity, contains still unexplored secrets that could be vital for humanity. Moreover, their sustainable forest management has proven to be the most effective method to prevent deforestation. Indigenous lands, despite external pressure, are consistently the best conserved areas of the Brazilian Amazon. The 1988 Brazilian Constitution recognized the original rights of indigenous peoples over their lands and their right to preserve their cultures. However, the implementation of these rights has historically been weak and has largely depended on the political shifts of the central government. In recent decades, pressure on these territories has dramatically escalated, driven by policies favoring agribusiness and resource extraction, often at the expense of environmental and human rights legislation. The true tragedy is not only the loss of lives or territories, but the imminent extinction of irreplaceable ancestral knowledge. When an indigenous language disappears, it is not just a set of words that is lost. A unique way of perceiving and categorizing the universe, flora, fauna, and history vanishes with it. The disappearance of even one of these 300 peoples is an irreparable impoverishment for all humanity. Today, the defense of Brazil's indigenous peoples is not only a matter of social justice or human rights, it is an ecological imperative. They are literally the first line of defense against the destruction of the Amazon, the lungs of the world, and a global climate regulator. Their resistance is our last hope to halt environmental collapse in the region. Final reflection. The lesson left to us by Brazil's indigenous peoples is humility before nature and cultural resilience. Despite 5 centuries of assaults, their spirit and knowledge persist. Listening to them, respecting their territories, and supporting their autonomy is not an act of charity, but a pragmatic recognition that their models of sustainable life are the ones that truly offer a viable path toward the future. The Brazil of 300 indigenous peoples is not a relic of the past, it is a model for tomorrow. Did you know the magnitude of this diversity? Share your opinion in the comments. If you believe the protection of these cultures is vital, share this video and help amplify the voices of the true guardians of the Amazon.